Jealousy as love. When someone checks your phone, questions who you're texting, or gets visibly upset when you spend time with friends and you find yourself thinking, well, at least they care, that's not love. That's control, dressed up in romantic packaging. Jealousy gets romanticized constantly. Songs, movies, even well-meaning people will tell you that a little jealousy is healthy, that it shows someone's invested. But here's what's actually happening. Jealousy isn't about love. It's about fear and ownership. When someone monitors your behavior, demands explanations for normal social interactions, or makes you feel guilty for having a life outside the relationship, they're operating from a place of insecurity and control, not affection. The underlying message is that you're not trustworthy, that you need to be watched, that your autonomy is a threat. And over time, this surveillance becomes normalized. You start limiting your friendships, skipping events, or hiding innocent interactions just to avoid the interrogation or the fight. This pattern usually stems from anxious attachment or past betrayal, but understanding the why doesn't make it less damaging. Real love trusts. It encourages connection with others because secure people understand that outside relationships strengthen you, not threaten the partnership. If someone's version of caring involves tracking your location, reading your messages, or isolating you from people who support you, that's not passion, it's possession. And the cost is your freedom, your friendships, and eventually your sense of self. Codependency as connection. There's this idea that being unable to function without your partner means you're deeply in love, that needing them for everything from decision-making to emotional regulation is romantic. It's not. That's codependency, and it's suffocating for everyone involved. Codependency looks like losing yourself completely in another person. Your mood depends entirely on theirs. You can't make choices without their input or approval. You feel responsible for their happiness, and they feel responsible for yours. But in a way, that's controlling rather than supportive. Boundaries dissolve. You stop knowing where you end and they begin. And both people will often describe this as being so connected, so in sync, when really it's emotional fusion born from fear of abandonment. What's happening here is that both people are trying to fill voids in themselves through the other person. Usually this comes from childhood experiences where love was conditional or inconsistent, so the blueprint for relationships became this desperate, clinging attachment where separation feels like death. One person might play the caretaker, constantly rescuing and fixing, while the other plays the one who needs saving. Or both people swing between these roles. Either way, nobody's actually showing up as a whole person. The problem is that codependency feels like intimacy when you're in it. The intensity, the constant need for each other, the way you can't imagine life apart. But it's not intimacy, it's enmeshment. Real intimacy happens between two separate people who choose each other, not two people who've merged into one dysfunctional unit out of terror of being alone. And when the relationship inevitably ends or one person tries to establish boundaries, the withdrawal feels catastrophic because your entire identity has been wrapped up in this other person. Silent treatment. People have started using therapy language to justify the silent treatment, calling it taking space or protecting their peace. But there's a massive difference between saying, I need an hour to cool down, and disappearing for days without explanation. The silent treatment is emotional abandonment used as a weapon. When someone shuts down completely, won't talk, won't even acknowledge you, they're not setting a boundary. They're exerting control through withdrawal. The message is clear, you did something wrong, and now you're being punished until you beg for forgiveness. This tactic is incredibly damaging because it triggers primal abandonment fears. Being ignored by someone you're attached to activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Often, the silent treatment comes from people who never learned healthy conflict resolution. Maybe they grew up where emotions were scary, so they learned to shut down. But in adult relationships, this becomes manipulative because it leaves the other person scrambling to fix something they don't understand. Real boundaries sound like communication. They sound like, I'm too overwhelmed right now. Can we revisit this tonight? Boundaries include timeframes and respect for the other person's need for closure. The silent treatment includes none of that. Constant fighting. Some people mistake chaos for chemistry. They think if the relationship doesn't involve screaming matches and dramatic breakups, then there's no real spark. This belief is dangerous because it confuses trauma bonding with connection. Constant fighting isn't passion. It's dysfunction on repeat. When conflict is your primary form of interaction, where you can't have a disagreement without it escalating into war, that's not love. That's addiction to the cycle. The fight gives you adrenaline, the makeup gives you dopamine, and your brain starts associating this roller coaster with excitement, with proof that you matter. But what's really happening is intermittent reinforcement. The relationship swings between terrible and amazing, and that unpredictability creates one of the strongest forms of psychological conditioning. You become hooked on the highs because the lows are so devastating. For a lot of people, this pattern stems from childhood environments where love and chaos were intertwined. So as adults, they unconsciously seek that intensity because it feels like home. The problem is that this cycle is exhausting and corrosive. Real passion exists where people disagree respectfully, where conflict leads to understanding. When fighting is your primary connection point, you're not building a relationship, you're trauma bonding. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, I post content like this regularly. I'd appreciate if you subscribed. Thanks. Sacrificing everything. There's this narrative that love means giving up everything for your partner, your dreams, your hobbies, your friendships, your identity. This is one of the most damaging myths because it conflates self-abandonment with devotion. Healthy relationships involve compromise. You adjust schedules, you make space for each other's needs. But there's a line between compromise and erasure. When you're constantly the one giving up what you want, when your goals get shelved while theirs take priority, when you've lost touch with who you were before, that's not love. That's losing yourself. People who demand this level of sacrifice often frame it as proof of your love. If you loved me, you'd move for my job. If you loved me, you'd stop seeing friends who don't like me. But real love doesn't require you to become smaller. This pattern usually shows up in relationships with significant power imbalances. The person sacrificing everything often falls into a martyr role, building resentment while feeling virtuous. What makes this particularly insidious is that the sacrifice feels meaningful at first. But over time, you wake up and realize you don't recognize your own life. Your friends are gone. Your passions have withered. Love should expand your life, not shrink it. Love bombing. When someone comes on incredibly strong right away, it can feel like finally, someone who sees your worth. They text constantly, want to see you every day, talk about your future after 2 weeks, shower you with gifts and declarations. And in movies, this is portrayed as ultimate romance. In reality, it's often a massive red flag called love bombing. Love bombing is when someone overwhelms you with attention to create rapid attachment and dependency. It feels amazing because who doesn't want to feel that wanted? But the intensity isn't sustainable and it's not real. What's happening is that the person is trying to lock you in before you see who they really are. They're creating an intense emotional bond quickly so that when the mask starts slipping, when controlling behavior or cruelty shows up, you're already attached. This behavior often stems from anxious attachment or narcissistic patterns. For anxiously attached people, it comes from panic. For people with narcissistic traits, it's more calculated. The problem is that love bombing works. It creates a powerful chemical response. You get addicted to being the center of someone's universe. And when that intensity fades, you're left chasing the high of those early days. But that version was never real. It was a performance designed to hook you. Genuine interest builds gradually. It's consistent but measured. Fixing someone. A lot of people fall for potential instead of reality. They see someone who's struggling and think, I can help them. My love will heal them. And this feels noble. Feels like real devotion. But it's not. It's codependency with a savior complex. When you're attracted to someone primarily because you think you can fix them, you're not seeing them. You're seeing a project. You're seeing an opportunity to prove your worth through rescuing. And this dynamic is toxic because the rescuer gets to avoid their own issues by focusing on someone else's problems, and the person being rescued loses agency. This pattern usually comes from childhood roles where you learned your value came from being helpful, from managing other people's emotions. So now you're drawn to people who need fixing because that's where you feel valuable. The problem is that you can't love someone into being healthy. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to fix themselves. And a relationship based on one person being the helper isn't a partnership. It's a parent-child dynamic. Real love sees someone fully and loves them anyway, without trying to change them. If you're consistently attracted to people who are unavailable or broken, what you probably have is an avoidance strategy, tolerating disrespect. There's confusion about what unconditional love actually means. Some people interpret it as accepting anything, as having no boundaries, as staying no matter how badly they're treated. This is deeply damaging because unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of mistreatment. You can love someone and still leave. Unconditional love means your care doesn't hinge on someone being perfect. It means you love the whole person. But it doesn't mean allowing yourself to be disrespected or harmed in the name of loyalty. When someone repeatedly lies to you, belittles you, or treats you like you're disposable, and you stay because leaving would mean your love was conditional, you've misunderstood the concept. What you're actually doing is abandoning yourself. This pattern shows up in people who learned early that their needs didn't matter, that asking for respect was selfish. So they grow up believing boundaries are incompatible with love. The cost is devastating. You end up constantly hurt, constantly hoping the person will change. But respect isn't something you earn through endurance. Real unconditional love looks like this. I love you, and I want the best for both of us, which is why I can't stay in a dynamic where I'm being mistreated. Those two things aren't contradictory. Constant communication. With phones everywhere, there's this expectation that if someone loves you, they're in constant contact. Good morning texts, updates throughout the day, good night calls. And if they're not responding immediately, that must mean they're losing interest. This belief confuses quantity with quality. Constant contact isn't intimacy. Often, it's anxiety. When you need to be in touch at all times, when silence feels threatening, when you're checking your phone obsessively, that's not love. That's insecure attachment playing out through technology. You're using constant communication as reassurance that they're still there. And demanding constant communication can be surveillance disguised as affection. This pattern comes from anxious attachment, where you struggle with object permanence in relationships. When someone's not actively engaging, some part of your brain panics. So you reach out constantly to confirm they're still invested. But this need is exhausting for both people. The person doing the reaching feels needy. The person being reached feels suffocated. Real connection happens in quality interactions, not constant check-ins. It's built through deep conversations and genuine presence. Healthy relationships include space. They include time where both people exist independently. If your love language is, I need you available at all times, that's not a love language. That's control wrapped in attachment anxiety. Grand gestures. Movies have convinced people that love looks like dramatic airport scenes and elaborate proposals. Grand gestures get celebrated while the daily work of relationships gets overlooked. And this creates a warped understanding of what real love looks like. Someone can bring you flowers after treating you poorly all week. They can plan an amazing date and then ignore you for days. And if you're focused on the big moments, you'll miss the pattern. This is intermittent reinforcement again. The grand gesture feels so good that it temporarily erases the neglect. Your brain gets hooked on those high points and learns to tolerate bad behavior in between. People who rely on grand gestures instead of consistent effort are often emotionally unavailable. The big moment lets them demonstrate love without the vulnerability of showing up day after day in small ways. It's easier to plan a surprise getaway than to consistently ask about your day and actually listen. Real love isn't flashy. It's someone noticing you at a hard day and making your favorite meal without being asked. It's remembering small things. It's showing up consistently, even when it's boring. If someone's love only shows up in grand public moments but disappears in the everyday, that's not love. That's performance. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks for watching.